Welcome everybody to the February 28th, 2024 Finance Subcommittee of the Brookline School Committee. We are going to jump right into things because we have a very packed agenda and we need to get through it all quick. We're going to start with approval of the January 17th, 2024 Finance Subcommittee minutes. Can I get a motion for approval? Thank you, Andy. Second.
I'll second.
Thank you, Sarah. Natalia, how do you vote?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
Sarah?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Next item on the agenda is acceptance of grants and gifts. We have a gift for $1,000 from a donor, Amy Green, for the high school Winthrop House program in memory of Jennifer Polk, who worked at Winthrop House as a social worker for many years, which is wonderful and very kind. Thank you to Amy Green. Any questions from the subcommittee before we take a vote? Okay, can I get a motion for acceptance? Thank you, Natalia. Andy, I'm taking yours as a second. Sarah, how do you vote?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
Natalia?
Yes.
And I vote yes as well, with gratitude to the donor. Next item on the agenda is update on FY25 budget process and timeline. We will jump right into that. Susan, do you want me to quickly overview what we talked about and what we're going to be doing over the next several weeks at full school committee?
Sure.
Okay,
Sounds good.
and then whatever I skip, you will make sure you cover. So Susan and I have been talking about this and talking with Linus and David and Andy about how to bring the budget, land the budget over the next month or so, month plus. So here's the plan for the next 4 school committee meetings. Tomorrow, the 29th at full school committee, Susan's going to be presenting the last round of learning questions. If you recall, there's been many questions submitted and she's been covering those over prior sessions. So that'll be tomorrow. Going through the last round of those that have been submitted. She's also going to update some other adjustments that have been made since the initial budget request. So for example, things that might modify the $2.2 million gap up or down, but they're not actually like changes to the budget. It's just like, oh, this thing accidentally got omitted, or this thing was double counted, or we're going to tweak this and move it to a grant, or whatever it is. All these little things that are tweaks that don't modify the spirit of the budget, but might modify the dollars slightly. So she'll be presenting that new number. And then, and this is again, all tomorrow, she's going to present the cost of the things that were, if you recall, when we first had that presentation, Susan had a slide which mentioned several things that were not included in the budget, but should be considered. And I'll just give one example. It was the cost of running a peer split campus, some of the costs associated with that. And so those were going to be costed out. That will also be presented tomorrow. Then we can discuss, you know, do we want to add any of those things? Do we want to add, for example, 2 recent conversations we had were about adding 7 FTE at the high school instead of 5. So do we want to ask or consider that additional 2.0? There were some additional ELA literacy costs that we've discussed that weren't added. So at the end of that conversation, we're going to go from 2.2 to some new number, which is the cost of these changing bits and anything we want to add, as I just mentioned. So we'll have this new amount that's a deficit. Then we've added that meeting, if you all recall, on March 14th, which is going to be a presentation from the central administration on how to close this budget gap with recommendations. And so there'll be this presentation and we'll have some initial discussion at that point. But there'll be then 2 weeks after that, not until March 28th, that we would actually consider a vote on that point on how to close the gap. And the idea is so that there's plenty of time for the community to consider, for us all to consider the discussion that happens at March 14th. If for some reason we do not take a vote on the 28th, we would still consider having the vote at the following school committee meeting, which is the 11th of April. So that's the landing of the budget, which still gets us into hopefully the end of March, but if not, early April to make a final decision on budget changes. Susan, did I miss anything?
You have an impeccable memory.
I
only
had I wrote it
Yes.
all down. so-
Okay, I was going to say that. I was so impressed. The
No,
only other thing I'd mention is that I will give you the revolving fund budgets tomorrow. I won't
Yes.
review them, but I will provide you with that last piece of information.
Thank you. So any questions from the subcommittee or other members of school committee on that process? Andy, go ahead.
Yeah, I wasn't sure when you were describing tomorrow, are any decisions to be made then, or is all of it purely informational?
I think that the decisions to be made tomorrow are we increasing the $2.2 million deficit with any of these other considerations or not? I think that's the decision to be made. Basically, how big is the hole that senior administration is looking to present filling on March 14th. Does that help? Okay. Other questions or comments, Helen?
What time on March 14th is this meeting?
I think it's at 6. Is that right, Betsy?
That's correct. 6 to 8 p.m.
Thank you.
Any more questions from anybody? Okay. Great. So the next item on the agenda is presentation and discussion of the FY25 to FY34 Cropper GIS enrollment projection report. And I just want to look back at my notes on how long we had budgeted for this one. Betsy, do you remember how long I said?
I don't. I'll give me 1 second.
I found it. I just found it, I
55
think.
minutes, I think.
Yes, 55 minutes. The idea is we have 25 minutes for the presentation and 30 minutes for the Q&A. So hopefully we can stick to 55 minutes total, Cropper team. And again, with heavy time on the Q&A, but certainly do the best you can to stick to 25 minutes and we'll do what we can. Thanks.
Mariah, before we get started, there was an attendee that had a question. I don't know if you want to take questions from attendees or not.
Oh, I missed it. Hold on one sec. Let me. Oh, Betsy, can you promote Carolyn since, I guess she's not a member of advisory anymore, but go ahead, Carolyn, or Betsy, can you let her ask her question?
Yeah, Carolyn, I think we should be able to hear you now.
Thanks. And right, I am not on advisory now. Mariah, sorry to go back now for a second, just on the process you just described. So senior administration is going to come back to school committee with their recommendations. The process is not at this point that school committee says, we suggest.
Yeah, I'm glad you
ABC.
brought this up. The reason
Thank you.
I'm going to say explicitly why I think this is important is I think it's a question of respect to all the staff in PSB, that people don't hear their job being wildly suggested by members of school committee or other people and sort of just thrown out there and feeling like they're on someone's list for removal without having the opportunity to be advised by senior leadership first that this conversation might be coming up. So when we get to that presentation, in fact, I do want to make it very clear to members of school committee who are probably already aware of this, but I still think we should all be explicit on it, that we don't want to have people shooting from the hip and essentially presenting their own list of areas where they should cut. If they want to talk about those things, they should talk about them privately on a one-on-one basis with the senior administration. But again, we don't want to have people feeling like their jobs are getting bandied about casually, because none of this is casual and we need to treat it with the respect that it deserves.
Okay, thanks. That makes sense. And then, sorry, just to confirm, so your expectation is that on the 14th, you hear from senior leadership with a balanced budget?
I think it's going to be their recommendations,
right?
and we can, and I don't know, and we'll see from, I don't know if Susan and Linus have decided this, whether they're going to present a slate of exactly how to balance it, or whether they're going to present more options than that. But But we'll get a little bit of more of a sense of that, I'm sure, in the near future.
Thank you.
Okay, sorry, go ahead, Matt. Are we supposed to be able to hear you? Because I can't.
Can you hear me?
well,
This is Zoran.
Oh, Zoran, yes, I can hear you now.
Just say a couple words. Thank you for the opportunity to present to you tonight. Matthew Cropper with Cropper GIS Consulting and our demographer, Zoran Stojakovic, with our company. We're here to present, as you mentioned, the results of our demographic study that we recently completed for the public schools of Brookline. And with further ado, I'll just hand it over to Zoran to lead the presentation.
Hello, everybody. I think I met some of you. My name is Zoran Stojakovic. I'm a demographer for Cropper GIS Consulting. And again, we're honored to have this opportunity to work with you and to develop this demographic study to help district plan for the upcoming years. Who we are K-12 school planning consulting firm. We've been in this business for over 20 years now, and we work mostly with school districts in various projects and various capacities. Our services include redistricting, capacity and utilization studies, facility planning, GIS analysis, web mapping applications, and of course, demographic study and forecasting. So the two main objectives of the study were to develop population forecast, and based on that, we develop enrollment forecast for each school, for each grade, for the next 10 years. So this is a two-step process that we do, and the main part of this whole study is actually developing population forecast. It's a main driver of the enrollment forecast, and without it, it would be very difficult to provide accurate information. So we do this population forecast by analyzing past, current demographic trends. We are assessing what they might look in the future. We look at various demographic, housing, economic data to create the most accurate picture of the trends in the area, in every neighborhood. And then we summarize it all in this report that you have in front of you with all the underlying data and maps and discussion. So next slide talks about data. These are the main four sources of our data, but there's others. Obviously, school district provided enrollment database by address, which we then use to geocode students to see where they're coming from, to see if they're not living in the same zone where they're supposed to attend, or if they're living outside the district. And again, these are just the students that are enrolled in public schools of Brookline. We also looked at Department of Education for historical data. Then for the population forecast, the main obviously source of data is a census 2020, which actually provided the full detailed block level data only last year. So this sort of gives us a fresh picture of what has been going on in the last few years, and the last 15 years really, and what we can expect in the future. We also look at 2010 data and sort of do comparisons between 2010 and 2020 to develop migration models per each age group. And then we look at the Department of Public Health, where we found birth and death data, which help us develop fertility and mortality models. So the next slide is, population model. This picture sort of shows the components of our forecast, obviously fertility, mortality, and net migration. What we do is we identify census blocks, which are the smallest granular level of full census information, and then get all the detailed information from them, and then assign them to each zone, school zone. And if some are split, then we use different GIS methods to assign them proportionally. And then we summarize this by each school zone and obviously by the district. And then we use cohort component method of forecasting, which is the golden standard of population forecasting. Components being fertility, mortality, net migration, or rather in migration and out migration. We look at 5-year age cohorts, and we forecast them each in 5-year increments starting in 2020. So each age group is forecasted to 2025, 2030, 2035. And so this population forecast provides us with starting point for enrollment forecast. Enrollment forecast is sort of easier part of this. It's based on the modified, it's a survivorship method. So each obviously grade is aged through the system, but we modify it based on the population forecast that we created. That's why it's not a simple survivorship method that projects past into future. So next,
Can I just ask, sorry, one question on
Yes,
the prior
yes.
slide? I didn't catch what SF1, 3, and 4 were.
these are data sets from the census.
Okay. So
Yeah.
it's just some of the detail from the census. Okay, thank you.
Yes, sorry. Yeah, these are data sets from the census. One is about housing, one is about population, and so on. Demographic factors considered in the forecast obviously include number of women in childbearing age, changes in area mortality rates, then out migration by age group, in migration by age group, and then local factors like housing. These are factors these are variables that we put, some of the main variables that we put in our model. That's how we calculate total fertility rates per age group, mortality rates per age group, and migration patterns by age group, which then we put in our model. So the next slide talks about, so before we start analyzing any of the zones, we create pyramids, population pyramids. I'm sure you've seen this before, but they're sort of a fingerprint. They show a lot of information visually, and they're a fingerprint for us to sort of give information, idea of what's going on in the zone, in the neighborhood, and what's going to happen in the coming years. All of these bars, all these age groups are connected, even the ones that are not of our concern directly. Obviously, children of certain age have parents, so they move with their parents. So the size of the parent cohorts are tied to the sizes of the children cohorts, and the different ages of children are tied to different ages of the parents. Then we have households that will have most likely school-age children, and then we have households that are empty nesters, and then households that are housing turnover households. These are very important for any forecast, and they're important here because this shows us potentially how many houses will be sold in the future, how many households will turn over to potentially younger families. Not necessarily, but the likelihood increases with the increase of rate of these households. And this, more than anything, including new construction, unless it's a very big subdivision of single family homes, is the main driver, housing driver of the population change. And then, like these bars show here, if there's a lot of people in grad school or tied to higher education, you're going to have 20 to 35 population groups higher. And we provide population pyramid for each of the school zones. So next slide. Okay, so for any study that we do, we have a certain set of assumptions. We provide a list of these assumptions, and it's very detailed. And there's sort of a guardrails for us to, when we're assuming what's going to happen in the next 10 years. Change of any of these assumptions will violate our assumptions, and potentially affect the forecast. So if somebody's, we're not expecting these to change, but if they do, and if somebody's evaluating these 5-10 years from now, knowing that some of these assumptions change, they would have a different, they would view our accuracy with different set of eyes. That's why we put these assumptions, detailed assumptions in our studies. They're vary from housing to economic to intra-district transfers of children, enrollment rates, and so on. So there's several slides of this. I'm not going to go through all of them. Can we go to the next slide? And next slide. Yeah, after assumptions. Okay, so this is the actual population pyramid in 2020 of the district, and as you can see, very high number of 20 to 35-year-olds. I know this is not telling you anything new, but it tells us what to expect. But besides that, if you can sort of think about the rest of the district, this is sort of a mature population pyramid, meaning not a lot is changing beyond these very important groups in the middle. So we also provide a population pyramid for what we're forecasting, which is the next slide, 2035. And it's very similar, but most of these age groups are bigger. We're not expecting a huge change in the structure, in the relationship of these age groups. So the next slide shows the, now we get into data that we provide in Appendix A of this forecast. These are sort of either census data or totals of our forecast. So this is the main population forecast total table. We're expecting the district to grow by about 4% each 5-year period, which is slightly higher than last 10 years, but pretty much the same. So in 15 years, from 20 to 2035, we're expecting it to grow to 12.2%, to about 70 to almost 71,000, from 63,000 right now. Obviously, different school zones we're expecting to grow in a different pace, but we're expecting them to all grow at least 6% in the 15 years from 20 to 2035. So the next slide shows is one of the household characteristics that we look at for each forecasted area. This tells us how many children under 18 are living in present in these zones, and as you can expect, Hayes and Baker have the highest percentage, which is tied to the highest percentage of single-family homes. And then as you go north in the district, these percentages go lower. And then you can see here households per population range from 2.16 to 2.87. So the next slide shows this is important for us when we're considering what to forecast, especially this middle column, which is percentage of householders aged 65 plus. All of these percentages went up since 2010, which means that there's a bigger percentage of households that is 65 and bigger expected turnover. We believe that this is the main driver of the population increase in the next 15 years, along with construction and all of that. But this is what we focus on the most. And then again, there's a highest percentage of households age 35 to 54, which is tied to their children, which is tied to higher rates of children, households with children, and Baker and Hayes are at the top of that. So next slide. Again, this is another slide that shows similar thing. Single person households that are 65, they are at the highest risk of turning over. And Brookline, as you know, is special, and not necessarily all of these homes will be turned over to younger families with children, but some of them will, and this affects the growth. And then we go to the next table, which is the totals of enrollment forecast for each zone, for each of the 8 zones. We're expecting pretty much stable enrollment in the next 5 years, and then the enrollment starting to grow by 10 is going to be 10.1%. We're forecasting 10.1% in the next 10 years. And out of these, only Driscoll and Runkle, we're expecting them to drop. And then Lincoln and Pierce growing most by highest percentage. This is another table that sort of is a fingerprint of what was happening in 2020. It shows single layer ages for each district, for each zone, from 1 to 10 years. And depending on migration, I would say in Brookline, there's less effect of this table because there's a lot of churn. There's a lot of people moving in and out, staying in the district for a few years, leaving, and children born in a certain area are not necessarily going to grow through the system. But it gives a picture of what's happening in the district, and you can see that there's more. The numbers go higher with age. So next slide. This is in our consultation with Cara Bruton. This is the final list of housing projects, construction projects that are happening or already happened starting 2020, all the way to 2035, with notes talking about which one is finished, which one is under construction, which might happen or might not. Obviously, the ones that are finished and the ones that are under active construction, we definitely taken into account in full. The ones that might happen, they're not necessarily taken into account in terms of yield, but is a consideration when we're doing a forecast. So next slide. So this is our one of the 2 main tables that are a result of the study. This is a total for population forecast for each age group. We are expecting, like I said before, growth about 4% each 5-year period to about 71,000 by the 2035. Age groups here are important. We're expecting growth in 0.0 to 4 and 5 to 9, and then also growth in 10 to 14 and 15 to 17, but not as high rate as younger ages. We are expecting similar number of births. They will grow slightly because of higher number of children, women in childbearing age. Deaths will increase too because of higher number of older population, which will leave natural increase to about the same. They will cancel out basically. Net migration is the hardest thing to predict here. We are expecting increase in 25 to 30 to about 1,540 in the 5-year period. This does not mean only 1,500 people will move in. This is a net number. And then slight decline in the 1,310 into 2030 to 2035. And so the change will be from 2,400 to almost 2,800 for about 2,470 in the last 5-year period. getting to 70,920. And then median age will slightly increase from 34.9 to 35.6. This median age usually is a good indicator, but there's a lot of things going on in Brookline, a lot of different age groups that are sort of canceling each other. And the median age looks very young, even though it's this number is a little bit deceiving. So next table is the main enrollment.
May I ask which factors are most important when you're trying to forecast migration?
Well, like I said before, the housing turnover is very important. The next factor is the new construction. And then that really depends which area we're talking about. New construction here, I think we're counting about 1,500 new units from 2020 to 2035, but most of it is going to be in the north, although there's big development projects in the very south. But there's a lot of currents that go different directions that are canceling each other out. So that's why we build a model and plug in numbers, and the result that we have is a set of probably about 15 variables that are affecting each other. But housing turnover is the main factor.
Okay, so availability of different types of housing rather than any other kind of economic data.
Yes, there's economic data like the price of the housing, the cost of the housing, the value of certain homes are probably not going to be starter homes for young families, even if they're turned over. Also, we have a slowdown in housing, in home sales, but the slowdown will probably level off. We're expecting to level off in the very short period. We don't know what's going to happen 5 years from now, obviously, with COVID affecting everything. Lots of formulas have changed sort of when we're predicting outcomes. But yes, economic factors obviously do have an effect.
If I could add to that also, Zoran, our assumptions state things that really have direct impact on net migration. One of the examples in particular is the home mortgage interest rate. We're assuming that does not go over 8%. So, if it stays between somewhere 6 to like where it is and doesn't go down below 5%, they should hold and don't go over 8. But if that mortgage interest rate drops down to say 5 or below 5, that's going to create a larger amount of home sales activity and will impact in-migration. It'll accelerate in-migration families in and out of the district. That number goes up over 8%, that's going to actually slow down migration, because as we saw with mortgage rates were 3.5% a few years ago. Now they're around 7%. And that rising interest rate has really greatly impacted mobility and migration in communities across the country. And so that's just an example of some of the indicators that we're looking at. We give what we think is going to happen in our assumptions, but if that mortgage rate, for example, goes up, we're probably going to be too high. If that mortgage rate goes down greatly, then your enrollment's going to be higher than what we forecasted.
With another caveat is that a lot of things are already baked in the cake already. A lot of things that are affecting forecast, like the housing, like people that moved in the last 3 years, especially because there's a delayed effect of children enrolling in the district. A lot of things have already happened, but they're only going to be presented in the enrollment in the coming years, and this especially is with regards to new construction that's going to happen, that already happened, and housing turnover. So there's a delayed effect of all of this. So
Wait, Val, hold on, Val. I just want to flag time. We're at 25 minutes now, so which was the time for our presentation. So Val, can you hold your question until we get to Q&A?
Sure.
Okay, and then Zoran, if you can maybe go a little faster to get us through
yeah,
some of this.
we're the
Okay,
last or next to last slide. We can go to the
Perfect.
next slide, really.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
So the key points here are that overall enrollment is forecasted to decline slightly to 6,630 students until 4 years from now, and then begin to rise to about 7,188 students at the end of the forecast horizon. Key point here is that total enrollment here is not projected to reach pre-pandemic levels throughout the life of the forecast. I think 2019-20, it was 7,500 students. We're projecting less than 7,200 students by the end of the forecast, even with this growth. High school enrollment will slightly decline to just under 2,000. We're forecasting it to slightly decline and then begin rising and sort of staying at the same level. But K-8 enrollment, we're forecasting for continuously to start rising from 27, 28 to reach the peak at the end of the forecast at over 5,000 students. And total change in the enrollment is 420 students, I believe, until ending with 2033, 34. But K-8 enrollment also is not expected to reach pre-COVID levels, which were 5,400 in just before COVID. And this is the case for all the K-8 schools and the high school. Only Ridley, we're expecting it to grow over the pre-pandemic numbers, and only by 20 additional students, and this is only in the last 2 years of the forecast. And I think we can start question and answers here.
Thanks. Before we take questions, hang on one second, Helen, and I'm going to go to Val too. I just want to make one comment about, if it's okay, Zoran, about the question that I had about how buffer zones are treated and how METCO and materials fee is treated, just for people just to understand. And I think I'm going to capture this right, but Zoran, correct me if I've gotten any of this wrong, which is, and it's not there's a table that's in the full report, which is posted in the meeting materials, which isn't presented here. Is the live, yeah, that one.
It's the live at the bottom.
Okay, so the live attend matrix. And so one of the things, sorry, it's so small on my screen. Let me look at my other screen. So for example, like Edith Baker, and you can see there's the columns at the top, which are where students live, and then there's the side where they attend. And so just to pick on that one as one example, there's a lot of students, like there's the map that has been used here doesn't necessarily incorporate buffer zones the way our current map does. So for example, in the Baker column, you see that it says like Baker students are 584 students who live in Baker are there. And then there's another 94 students who attend Heath but live in Baker, in that if you go down too. And some of those where you see sort of like lots of people, yeah, like that refers to really the way that they've had to code the map, which doesn't necessarily reflect the buffer zones the way that they are. So if you look at the map in the report, which isn't shown here, you'll actually see that it actually just has zones for each school. And then the other thing I want to flag is if you look all the way down at the row Baker, there's the out of district 61 there. So you can see exactly that whole column. Those are the students who are METCO and materials fee, and it says out of district, and that actually means out of Brookline. So they live out of Brookline, and as we've all talked about, there's about 300 materials fee students and 200 METCO students, about 500 total. And so you can see that the out of district there at the high school is 160 something. And then the 355 is about 500 total, which gives you again that same 300 plus 200 of materials fee and METCO. And the reason I just want to mention that is, for example, as you look at some of these forecasts, they might show that one school is going up or down or something, but there's actually quite a few students who are not geographically coded to that school. They're currently assigned, and the demographer team carried those numbers forward statically and that's one of the assumptions in the report. But that actually means that there's, as you can see, not only those numbers, but the buffer zone numbers, there's actually a lot more flexibility baked within our system that's not necessarily represented here as you look at it at the school enrollment projection forecast. So I just want to highlight that to people as they might, and especially to the public who might be seeing this as they look at their school and it appears to be growing well past prior enrollment or shrinking dramatically, that there's actually, luckily, Brookline has quite a more flexible enrollment than this represents at the school level. Did I get that all right, Zoran?
Yes,
Does that
perfect.
okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so I just want to make sure everyone's aware of that issue. I want to call on Val first if Val is still here because her question
am.
was, okay, go ahead, Val, and then we'll go to the people with hands up.
It's a quick question. How much give is there in that mortgage rate stat that you gave? I mean, I'm hoping that we're not going back to 1983, right, with 9% interest for the next decade. So I'm just wondering how much import that was given in your analysis.
We're not tying these results necessarily, number by number. So it's not necessarily something we can calculate per se. We're not expecting it to grow by more than 8%, to more than 8%. And beyond that, lower than that, it's not affecting our forecast. Now, if it goes above, it depends on how much it goes above. We never know.
I was actually thinking the opposite, right? It's been below 5 for a long time, or it was below 5 for a long time. How much, what would an approximation be if it were below 5 for 5 of that 10-year period?
I wouldn't know. I don't think that it would go under 5, frankly, but I think that it would have to go significantly under 5 for it to have a positive impact on incoming population growth. Yeah.
Another thing to note with that, the interest rates are that when they drop or they go up, demography is kind of like a super tanker and not a speedboat. So it takes a while for, if that rate drops down below 5%, it gets to 4%, say, it's going to churn more home sales activity and going to create more existing home sales and new home construction where there's available. But it takes a while for that phenomenon to start showing up in enrollment, because it just takes a while for the numbers to get to a rate to where you start seeing things. And so the first 5 years of our forecast are pretty certain with what we know, because these are based on students that are already here. The second 5 is more reliant on the forecast. And so I think that if those mortgage rates were to drop, say, to 4%, we would probably see that pickup and that growth happen in the second 5 period more than the first 5. Maybe a little bit more higher activity, higher enrollment growth in the first 5, but I think you'd start to see it more in the second 5-year period of the forecast.
Thank you. Helen?
Thank you. Thank you for this report, first of all. My recollection is you did a previous report for us, but I don't remember what year right now.
You don't remember because it was like the day before COVID started, so we had other things on our mind.
It wasn't before then?
No, it was like I think reported like late February of 2020. So
2019 was the last school year.
That is the most important part of any potential answer I would give you about it, that it was done pre-COVID.
And so it predicted a higher rate, and now you're predicting more stable, lower rate.
Yes, and plus, since then we had 2020 census published, which gave us,
Right. Okay, and you didn't use the prior demographic report that we had from MGT.
No. I'm not aware of it. No.
You don't ever, do you ever do that?
We don't like to look at other studies. We like to just make it be a completely objective, independent study. And so we do, districts always like to share with us other studies that have been done. But we honestly like to stay clean-headed and look at it with a clean slate and not have another methodology or however their process is influence what we are doing.
Okay, if I could ask one other question. Brookline's population, as you probably have been told or know, has a number of English families that come from abroad, stay here for 3 or 4 years, mostly in the elementary schools. That seems to have declined, I think. I don't know if you looked at that or whether the possibility of that increasing, was that at all factored in?
I think we were provided by Susan a churn presentation from recent, and that number, at least for the last school year, seemed to have grown. So these are like unique student IDs moving in the district and leaving.
Right.
We would have to have more years to compare to establish any trend.
Right. Right. And the years that you have had haven't been enough. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks,
Yeah, we had a
Natalia. Oh, go ahead, Susan. You wanted to add something?
I was just going to say that we've only been collecting and the churn information for 3 years. So maybe in a couple more years, we'll have enough data if we continue to gather it in the same format that will help us to be able to use it in a forward-thinking way in the future.
I worked for the school. I worked for Austin School District for a while, and this is exactly what we were doing, calculating churn. Some of the kids were moving 6-7 times a year just within the district, and just keeping up with their addresses is, especially going past. You gotta record those addresses before they change the system.
Right.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Huh.
But it's not
I
necessarily
thought we
relevant
did-
to the forecast, actually.
I thought we
Yeah.
did actually have churn data from before that, although I remember getting it.
We did have churn data that we're required to report to DESI, but it could be that the quality of the data that Susan is referring to is a different quality of data. She's nodding. Like, I don't know if the DESI data we've been reporting on churn is to the level that Susan's describing.
Exactly.
Okay.
Natalia, go ahead.
I have 3 questions. The first one is around confidence intervals on these point estimates. Like, what do you have? Do you typically report confidence intervals? Like, I'm used to public health data, so I'm used to sort of thinking about things without that. So it would be nice to know that, with 90% certainty, you think you'd be 200 off versus like 1,000.
Plus or minus 2% is what we're
Plus or minus 2%?
for the total enrollment.
Okay.
Assuming none of the assumptions are violated.
Okay.
And we were within 2%, I think it was 1.98% of our last forecast series. And granted, there was a lot of things happened through that, over that time period since then, but 2% for the life of the forecast. So any number that you see in the next 10 years at the district level, we like to look within that confidence span of 2%. When you get into the attendance area level, the error starts to go up greater because of other mostly policy related things and choice. And like in Brookline, a perfect example would be
Like
if there's
buffer zones, yeah.
changes in the buffer zone rates and things like that, that can influence the school level results. But with the first thing we do when we look at evaluate a forecast that we've done, which we like to look at enrollment for Brookline next year and see how we're tracking. If we're tracking high or low, we always go back and evaluate what our assumptions were and see how the current situation is in relation to some of those. Because this is basically a demographic-based forecast that tells you what will happen to your enrollment if these assumptions hold. And usually it's things that, like Zoran said, something that violates some of those assumptions go off of what we have assumed that causes that error.
Got it. 2% sounds reasonable. Then my other question was around the 2020 baseline. Is that was that data since like just because of COVID, I'm just curious, is that a baseline that you trust? Like, I mean, I know that's kind
That's
of
a good question. That's a good question. Yeah, we trust it. I mean, we trust it. We use it because it's the best data available. Um, we have yet to, since this data was made available on the most granular level just last year, the evaluation is still ongoing about general accuracy of this data. But yes, we use 2020 because it's by far it's the census, so it's by
And
far
leading-
the best
Leading
we
up
can.
to the 2020 census, as you may know, probably know, there was a huge delay in them releasing data. They were talking, and one of the big problems was I
Differential
believe that
privacy.
attributed to that delay was this differential privacy. What they were introducing error into their numbers to try to ensure privacy of individuals. We were part of conversations with the Bureau, with our demographic community, leading up to that, because they sent some sample data out to the demographers in the community to have us evaluate and look at some of this. And there was big problems. We had some major concerns with the 2020 census when they first started releasing some of these demonstration files. But then when the actual census came out, when they finally released it last year, we were much more comfortable and surprised that they seem to have pulled it together. That the most important thing where we could see error was when we got the first set of data was when their draft information, we looked at a population pyramid, and those population pyramids were
All over.
looked random. They were just all over the place. And the new data, we've compared that. We looked at that population at age structure in 2020. And that's why we look at 2010 as well, so that we can compare and do some sanity checks. 2010 versus 2020. What would we normally see happen to a population change in those 10 years? And we feel like the 2020 census, we have a lot more confidence in the 2020 census after seeing some of that information.
Yes, and this differential privacy issue was a much bigger problem than COVID was for 2020 for underreporting or overreporting. But hopefully, and from what we're saying, the numbers line up now with a huge population of students or graduate students here. That might be a problem. But
I just
yeah.
want to flag that we've got 7 minutes left for this section. You have one more
Okay,
question, Natalie,
okay.
and there might be other
Sorry.
questions too. Go ahead.
To Helen's question, the census 2020, like we did expect a lot. We do know that a lot of international families left. So that, like, to me, that is just like, I didn't quite feel that we're capturing that yet with the answer that we don't have good 3-year data. Like, we do know that international families left, right? I think.
We do. I'll answer that.
Yes, based on the data that we have on who left that year, we do. I don't know if they left before or after though, because wasn't the census over the summer that year? So they might have still been here. I don't know. Any more questions? No, that was the last one. Any other questions from the subcommittee, other members of the school committee, advisory committee colleagues? Sarah, are you turning on to, you're good? Okay, I want to make one comment. This is sort of a comment on where we ended up on the numbers and a general comment on the enrollment. Sometimes I think people strive to end up, they almost say like, we're almost back at where we were pre-COVID, as if being where we were at pre-COVID was some aspirational goal. And I want to say and reflect that it's actually great to hear that we're going to have relatively stable enrollment that will not reach, hopefully, if this enrollment forecast is accurate, pre-COVID levels, because I just want to remind everyone that the buildings were jammed beyond comfort at that point. And so this, to me, again, if we can use this forecast and be planning for both our budget and our capital needs is really wonderful to be able to look at a relatively stable at the high school level and a slowly increasing in the out 5 years of the forecast. That means we've got time to plan, time to consider, time to look at things. And so I want to just flag that for people that we didn't not being at our pre-COVID levels is one of the conclusions that Zoran mentioned. That's good. And this is a nice way for us to be able to plan looking forward. And so I think it's great that we've done this report, and it gives us some additional confidence. And it's also great that, as Susan mentioned a couple of months ago, we got a separate report from NESDEC, which is not all that different. So it's even wonderful to have two separate reports that give us a nice triangulation of a relatively stable population. I feel like it's really great to have both of those things coming together to endorse and to allow us to plan for the future, to endorse each other and to allow us to plan for the future. And that's what I wanted to say about this. Helen, go ahead.
So just to add to that, if I might, the MSBA also did a demographic study when we were looking at partnering for Pierce, and they came out with basically the same numbers too. And that's why they limited Pierce to a 4-section school at the time. So, and they looked at the total district.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too that Pierce, that they did that beforehand. So I'm not sure how valid it is. And it's also interesting that at least in the Pierce, like the zone level forecasts that Zoran went by quickly because due to time, Pierce is one of the 2 schools I think that grows most in population and will go beyond 4 sections. But again, the magic of the buffer zones and the ability to place students early on in a where the district has capacity for students who live out of Brookline is an opportunity to make sure that those levels all balance. Okay, we're at 5:57. Any other
Sorry,
questions or
excuse me.
comments? Yep.
This is Carolyn, and sorry, I still have this mute button and I don't have a hand raise function, and I'm getting a text from Carol Levin saying that she was hoping to comment, but in this format, there's no more hand raise.
Thanks for letting me know. Betsy,
Excuse me.
no, thank you for unmuting. Betsy, do you mind promoting Carol? Or turning on however it is she can talk? I'm not sure.
Carol, if you unmute, we should be able to hear you now.
Thanks, Betsy.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Great. So thank you. I appreciate all the detail in this forecast. I have one question and one comment. The question is, just in general, how well correlated are the demographic trends for historical and moving forward trends for Brookline correlated to the larger demographic trends for the country? Are we an outlier, or are we basically tracking what's going on elsewhere?
Very different dynamics happening, and the country as a whole has lots of different things going on. Brookline cannot even be compared to other districts and necessarily to other districts in the state. So it's different.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wasn't thinking about districts. I was just thinking about larger demographic trends. And then the other comment is really about you're using the interest rates as a proxy for housing affordability. And housing affordability compromises housing prices, interest rates, and taxes. And if interest rates fall, there's also going to be a high likelihood that housing prices will continue to increase. So I'm a little concerned about the assumptions you're making or how heavily you're relying on interest rate rather than a more nuanced measure of housing affordability. Also, a lot of our students live in rental housing, and I didn't see where you were capturing rental housing in your assumptions or what that was being represented by in your model.
So with the rental housing, sort of the already existing rental housing, strangely enough, the rental housing has a more stable dynamic happening than sort of in a neighborhood with lots of single family homes, because there's people moving in, moving out, moving in, moving out, and the pupil yield from rentals does not change as much as subdivision with single family housing that might age. People might start selling homes, and then there's a churn. There's an increase in pupil yield.
Okay, and is the 150 units a year turnover, is that the historical average? Or is
Plus-
that what you're-
This is what we're expecting, and it's based on historical average, but also what we're expecting, a little bit higher than last 3 years.
Because
which
I
is-
will point out that people in Brookline, older residents have nowhere to move. And that's part of a national trend that people are staying in their houses much longer
That's true.
than it has traditionally been the case. So I would expect less turnover or delayed turnover by the baby boomer generation.
Yeah, especially in Baker and Hayes. Yeah.
There's a lot of baby boomers that are out there that are just waiting for some trigger to make their move. And that's one thing that we're seeing across the country and in the US is that the population is getting older, and that baby boom generation is really getting really close to the turnover ages. And so that we're seeing that here, but that's a dynamic that we're seeing all across the country. And it has, with the raising interest rates, that has stalled some of that movement that would have normally happened if had those been lower.
The subject of many a New York Times article.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
Yes,
I'm not
yeah.
sure I agree with that analysis, but thank you.
Okay, I think we're going to draw this part of the presentation and the meeting to a close. Thank you very much, Matt and Zoran, for the presentation. That was really helpful, and for the report as well. Much appreciated, and great to get this information to be able to plan. So thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
You too.
Have a good night.
Okay, I think next on the agenda is the FY24 Q2 report. Which did we, Betsy, Susan, Diane, did we get a copy of the report beforehand? I didn't see one in my email anywhere. Did I just miss it? I didn't miss it, did I?
A couple of hours ago it came in.
Oh,
So
sorry.
that's okay.
Crazy
From me,
afternoon.
I just sort of resent something that might have said demographic report. So with
Was
some
it
additional
attached to something
attachment.
that said demographic report?
Yes. So
Oh, okay. I must have just missed it. Okay, do we need to pull it up on the screen, or Susan, are you going to pull it up so people can see it, or is Diane just going to talk to it?
I'm going to pull it up so
Okay.
that the viewing audience can see it, and Diane's going to present it.
Wonderful. And just to remind, we have, I think, 10 minutes for the presentation and 5 for Q&A.
And first, before I do that, though, I do want, for those people who have not met Diane, Diane Johnson is our finance director. We were so thrilled to have her here. She joined us, I think, around the 8th of November, and has been working and going great guns to try to help us get some higher level data in place. And so I'm glad that she's here and able to present us with some another layer of information that I think we'll all find helpful. So I'd like you to welcome Diane, and I will start the presentation.
Thank you, Susan. I appreciate it. Thank you all for having me here tonight. This is my first go with the town of Brookline. So this is.
Can you see? I just want to make sure you can see.
We can see the revenue funds. Are you going to start there or the general fund?
Well, I thought I brought up the general fund, but I guess I didn't.
No, I can see the special revenue funds one.
Okay, sorry, let me try again.
Okay.
Okay.
This is an interesting place to start. Okay.
Oh, well.
Well, you know me and
Let's get
using
into the
Zoom.
weeds.
Let's go deep and then go high. All right, so let me try this again. Here. All right. Let's see if I got it right this time. Can you see it now?
Yes. Yep.
All
Perfect.
right, all
Thank
right,
you.
all right.
So, okay, this is the general fund or the school operating budget. And thanks to some very diligent work by Susan and the rest of the staff, we are closing in on an understanding of our personnel expenses in a very nuanced way. So for the first time, we feel comfortable having an estimate of where our salaries in the general fund are going to carry us through the end of the fiscal year. Doesn't sound like much when you report it, but the work behind it is truly immense. And the staff deserves a lot of credit, and Susan deserves a lot of credit for the work that went into that. Other than that, we are progressing along, and please remember that these numbers here are as of December 31st, so not as of today. Are there any would you be okay if we did them in two parts and took questions from this part?
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Okay,
Are you going to talk through the detail, or should we just ask questions as we have?
ask questions as you have them.
Okay, I'm going to ask a big picture question.
Sure.
Two big picture questions. One is there any sort of important trends that the surplus or deficits here represent? And then my other question would be, do you have any sense, given that we're 2/3 of the way through Q3, that any of this isn't going to hold up? And the answer to the second question might be nope, because we haven't done that analysis yet, and that's okay. But I was just curious whether we're going to actually end up with a $2.8 million deficit, or if you see that melting a little bit. And then again, any important trends that you see here.
I would say at this point that I do not have the confidence to stake my life on it. If I had been here from the beginning of the fiscal year, if I had dug deep, I would have more confidence, but I don't at this point. I feel like we may see that shrink a bit, but to what extent, I'm not ready to say.
Okay.
I'm very happy with the personnel expense line. I think that's very solid. I am less solid with the other lines, though I don't think they're bad. I do think there's some possible pressure on transportation, which could be an ongoing problem. Things are popping up all the time there. So that's where I come down on that.
And transportation is in the outside services line?
Yes.
Okay.
I think the other thing to note too is that this is as of, again, December 31st, and there's a lot of encumbrances that haven't occurred yet.
Mhm.
So as we go through each semester, you know, teachers and staff will order supplies for the upcoming semester or trimester. And so none of that is encumbered at this particular point. So we aren't going to land at 2.8. This is just a forecast of where we're at this point in time. This is not a cost to complete, what we call a cost to complete. That analysis is typically done in the third quarter. So
I have another question on personnel. To what extent does the surplus there represent positions that haven't been filled versus variance between expected full staffing and less cost for expected full staffing?
I couldn't answer that off the cuff, but I'm happy to take a look at that and get back to you.
Thank you. Other questions from subcommittee or other members of the committee or advisory on the general fund status before we go into the special revenue funds? Andy, was that your hand raised? I couldn't tell. No?
No,
Um,
just looking at Chin.
Okay, I've got one more question. Sorry, this is such an important report. It's so little and yet so important. Are there opportunities, or will you be looking, I presume you'll be looking at opportunities to rebalance things to the FY24 report or to the FY24 general fund if there are multi-year grants or such that we can use in future years?
I'm sorry, could you, I don't quite understand your question.
If there's costs that have been charged or expected to be charged to the general or to grants or other multi-year accounts, revolvers, but they are equally applicable to the general fund, will we be shifting them off of the grants and onto the general fund to be able to carry forward multi-year, sort of offset future year deficits that we may have by shifting them if we continue to retain the surplus?
okay, all right. So I just want to clarify. We don't have a $2.8 million surplus. Okay, so I don't want anybody to walk away and think that we have all
Well,
this money
if we
sitting here.
continue to,
But
right?
well, we won't, right? We won't, because there's a lot of spending that happens in the second half of the year that's not represented here. And it won't be until after encumbrances are done. And there are positions that are not filled. The HR director, we hope to fill that in this next quarter. We hope to fill the director of operations as well. And so when those come online, the encumbrance on the personnel line will then shrink. So so I don't want anyone to walk away and think that what we're doing is we have this huge surplus and that we need to react to that, because that is not what this second quarter report provides for you. That and the next report will be more of a cost to complete, where we'll take a look at spending from now until the end of the year, because we will have captured the majority of spending that would take place in a typical year. So the next report that you receive is really the more valuable one in terms of having those conversations about, are we going to have money left over at the end of the year? This will be our best estimate. And then typically in my past, and I'm sure Diane feels the same, usually you get another report in the beginning of June. So those are the two ones that you can rely on more closely for where we're actually going to land for the year. But that is not what this report is telling us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, do you want to go to the special revenue funds?
Okay, let's see if I can pull that off again. Let's see, this one, right? It's so tiny. How'd I do?
Yeah, but it's hard to see. Can you open it up in the PDF view that you had instead of as
Yeah.
a,
Okay. Okay, stop. That here, but it didn't show up. Let's see. This one? Yeah, okay. All right.
thank you.
How about now? Good?
Yes,
Okay.
it's on page 2 though. I don't know if you meant to be on page 1.
I do mean to be on page 1. Let's see. Susan has an apple, which is quite outside my comfort zone. Oh, look at
There
that.
we
I
go.
made it move. Yay, me. All right. So these are the special revenue funds, and this looks quite a bit different than what Susan gave you last quarter. What we have here for the federal grant section is what appears in the first column is what was in the FY24 budget. What appears in the next column are what I call the approved budget. It's what actually came in for the year for the FY24 grants, which I believe are approved by the school committee. And the other years are balances carried forward. And it was reported all in aggregate in previous years, but I think breaking it out by year gives it a cleaner picture. I found it very difficult to speak to 3 things all growing in different directions. So I've broken it out by fiscal year. And then we have the revenue collected to date as of December, what's been expended to date, what's been encumbered to date, and what the balances are to date by fiscal year. For these areas you see in overrun, these have to do with salaries being posted to the wrong fiscal year. With the change in staffing at the turn of the fiscal year, these salaries continue to accrue to the prior fiscal year instead of being moved up to the next fiscal year in both these cases. And these are things that will be corrected shortly. Any questions on?
Yeah, I have a question. Oh, I'm sorry. Mariah?
Go ahead, Helen.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Should have waited for you to recognize me.
No, go ahead.
The revenue to date, what does that mean?
That is cash that has been drawn down against those grants.
Oh.
And with the federal grants, we are migrating from one grants management system to another with DESI. And so the newer grants are in the new GEM system. The old grants are in Grantium. And so there's been some delays in terms of getting comfortable in the new system. The old system used to hand you a certain amount of revenue immediately when the grant was approved.
Right.
System only allows you to draw down against expenses that you've already incurred.
Ah, I see.
So we wanted to, so between that, we had some staff turnover. We were not leaping on drawing down cash immediately, but we're owed that money. We can pull it down, and we have started pulling. We have a new person in the grants position, and we've started pulling down cash. And so once we've spent the money, we can pull down all the cash that we've expended.
Now I understand it. I couldn't understand what the revenue to date line.
Yep. No, it's
So
an excellent
essentially,
question.
the approved budget is essentially the authorization from the federal government up to that amount, correct? And
So
then
the
we can just
state-
draw down against that. Well, these are all federals.
Yeah, these are all.
And I
federal.
don't know if the state operates on a drawdown or
It also does, and
it does, okay.
Yeah.
Can I ask one question on the prior fiscal years?
Sure.
At what point does the federal government require us to return funds? How many years of grace do we receive?
that's an excellent question. Susan asked me the very one, and I cannot answer that at this time because it sometimes depends on the grant. And with COVID, you look at 22, we're sort of on the end of the COVID period, and many things were extended and slid. And because of the change from Grantium to GEMS, I'm not set up in Grantium. I'm working in GEMS, and I can't go into GEMS and look it up. 3 years
Okay.
from now, I'll be able to go back and find all kinds of great stuff. So if you want to know, I'm certainly going to look it up for my own edification, and I'm happy to share it with you.
I would like to understand it because if I just, for example, looking at the ones we can see on this page, it looks like there's 4 or maybe 5 FY22s, and it's not clear to me, but maybe it's clear to you. Are we allowed to charge, for example, FY24 expenses against the FY22, or can we only charge those prior year expenses against those years? So I guess I just want to understand, like for the Title I FY22, we have $22,000 there, but is it actually,
Well,
is that funds,
17.
isn't it the 20? Well, that's my second question is it says FY24 expended to date against it, but were we allowed to expend against it?
We are being
We
very
are.
careful about that.
Okay,
So
so we are allowed, we're not out of the side of the expiration period for anything
Correct.
that we've charged. Okay,
But I can't answer you specifically what the end date is on each of these grants.
but is that something that you're going to be, you and the grant specialist are going to be identifying pretty quickly to ensure that we're spending down the balance
yes.
before the expiration date? Okay, perfect.
yes.
Thank you.
We want all that money.
Exactly. Okay. Because I know we've been really managing that closely for the SR2 and 3 programs, and we talked, I think, at the prior quarterly report about ensuring that, because I think 2 expires in the end of September this year, right? Doesn't expire with the end of the the federal fiscal year? Or maybe even 3 does. 2 actually, I think already did, right? But we had back charges to it.
Well,
Am I remembering right, Susan?
Three is done. So we're all set with that. That money's about to go out the door.
But like if we look at 2,
Yep.
that has the 325,000, like it has 178 there.
And I got a journal entry on my desk today for like 80,000. So work
So they're
is
gonna-
progressing.
Okay, but like for SR2, if it already expired,
No, it would have to be the movement of expenses that fit within the grant period.
okay, but are we
So-
still doing that to close out SR2, which already expired?
If the expense happened within the grant period.
Yes.
So you can move the expense from the general fund to the grant. So if we had expenses, say, assuming, and I don't know this for sure, assuming the grant closed on September 30th, and we had expenses from July, August, September that are grant eligible, that are appropriate to the grant, we could still move them now because the activity took place within the grant period.
And what's the look back? Is it 6 months? How long are we allowed to go back? Like, are we going to reach the end of being able to transfer at some point? Like,
Oh, yes.
the
at
end of
some point.
March? Okay,
I'm not sure about that. I would have to get
Okay.
you, but we are keeping an eye on it.
okay. Any more questions from the committee on federal, or can we keep going to state? I'm going to take that as we can keep go to state.
Okay, state. It's like it's backwards from what you think. It's backwards from what I think it is. Okay, you have to drive. There we go. Okay. Here are the state grants. Again, the same format. The first column is what was in the budget book for 24. This is the column of what the grants actually came in as. This is the revenue that's been drawn down as of December 31st, expenses and encumbrances.
I think we approved one last month that was for
This would be as of December 31st.
Oh, okay, sorry, right, thank you. Any questions on state for people? Okay, let's keep going.
I can't drive your Apple.
There you go.
Okay, now this is the private grants. This is a little different because these carry between fiscal years. And so I've reversed the columns here. This column is what was available coming from FY23 into 24. This is the column that was in the budget. Revenue collected to date, which was none as of December 31st. Expenditures to date, encumbered to date. Please ignore this last line. I should not have created it. It is too confusing. It adds nothing to the illumination of the nations. So please disregard it.
Okay. Any questions from anyone? My only question would be, some of these have been shown to us over multiple years with no charges against them, and it would be great to, okay, you know where I'm going with that. Thank you.
Yep, like,
I'll just finish
let's-
my thought for everybody, but just to like, spend the funds down and close them or whatever is going to happen with them. Thanks.
Yep.
Okay, page 4. Look, you figured it out.
I did, yay, she can be taught. All right. This is the revolving gifts and fees. This is sort of everything else in the special revenue category. So again, this starts with the FY23 available funds. And then what was the next column is what was in the FY24 budget, the FY24 revenue to date, expended to date, encumbered to date, and balanced to date. The overrun here in the use of facilities has to do with an excess of positions being posted to this account, which will be moved back to the general fund.
That's custodial positions?
It is.
Okay. And have custodial positions already been charged to food services at the appropriate amount or not yet?
To food services?
I thought that some of the custodial charges were charged to food services because there was related custodial costs associated with food services. Am I misremembering?
That's the first I've heard of
I've
that.
never heard of that.
Okay, very good. Helen, wait 1 sec. I just wanted to ask before we go to other questions. Food services, the FY24 approved budget, which is, I presume, the estimate from staff of what it would hit last year. The revenue to date is less than half of that amount, but I'm presuming it's because of the way the school year aligns with, is it correct that's the way the school year aligns with the fiscal year, and so it's heavily weighted towards the second half of the fiscal year? Okay. Helen, go ahead.
Well, I wanted to comment on some of the fact that food services is in the black, and that for years we had a deficit in that category. And between, thank you, the state, but more thank you to Sasha for really bringing this budget into alignment, and also for serving amazing food. I was there for lunch the other day, and it's really tasty and fresh looking and presented beautifully, not like most people would think of cafeteria food, at least not when I went to school. So, I think that's really great. And also the fact that the summer school so far is not in the red. So those are two pieces that in looking at this over the years, those were the two areas that usually we had some difficulty, that and athletics. So thank you.
Thanks, Andy. And then I think we'll wrap up this portion of the presentation so we can go ahead to the base presentation. Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm looking at the circuit breaker line and comparing it to, I think, what we last heard about it back in October.
You're on page 3.
Yeah.
Or two, I guess it is. Yeah.
Right. So the approved budget in that line is, considerably less than the budget estimate. And I also think that there was like a $3 million balance, right, left over from the previous year for circuit breaker. Anyway, I'm just trying to understand sort of the status of that line, if you could help.
Sure.
Sort of what we're seeing there.
Best practice in circuit breaker is that you spend a year behind of your collections. You don't want to be spending it as fast as you're bringing it in. So we should be we're collecting this year's and we'll spend it next year's. So we budgeted the prior year. So there should be, under best practices as recommended by DESE, a year's lag.
Okay,
Does
so
that
the
make sense?
difference, I'm wondering partly where does this difference come from between the budget estimate, the 3.475 million, and the approved budget, the 3.157 million?
I believe that the 3,475 is what we're collecting this year. And that the 3,156 is what was collected in the prior year and what we're actually spending this year. And we'll spend this next year.
Oh,
So circuit breaker is different than many of these other ones. Is that,
okay.
yes, okay.
Yes, it is, there's nothing that bars you from spending it as fast as you bring it in. But special ed being such a highly volatile area, it is highly recommended by DESE that best practice is to spend, if you can, to hoard a year and spend behind.
Okay, so the FY24 approved budget is largely the like the balance from last year. the
FY23 is
carryover.
intake.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, thank you. That's very helpful.
Stephen, and then we're gonna switch over to base. Sorry, Michelle, I promise we'll get to you quickly. Go ahead, Stephen.
Thank you. Stephen Reader's Advisory Committee. I just wonder which of these accounts allow you to carry over from year to year. It sounds like there is carryover from year to year. And I think it might be helpful to have a line for the benefit of people trying to understand this that talked about the carryover amount. So you can see in a way what's to be spent that might have not been spent last year. If I've understood correctly, the idea that you bring it in one year in order to spend it the next year.
Circuit breaker stands alone in the state grants and being handled that way, but the private grants and the other things.
Roll from the other mill. Okay, which way, tell me where you're trying to go. And I'll
Okay,
take
so
it.
circuit breaker is the first line. That's unusual in that spending pattern. But if you roll down to the next page, private grants, where you see it says FY23 available funds, that's funds carried forward from the prior year. And if you go down to the final page, that too are funds carried forward from the prior year.
Okay, thank you. It might be just so the general public and people like me can understand if we had a little legend what the words actually mean. Probably wouldn't take you a amount of time, just to put under the table available funds means, this and that. Because when you look at this for the first time or the second time, you're always sort of partly trying to understand what the columns are. And then, of course, you miss the conversation about, the meat of the matter. Thanks, though.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Stephen.
Thank you for your suggestions.
Thank you, Diane, for presenting. Very helpful. And if anyone has questions, I'm sure they can follow up with you separately later on.
Yes, please.
Thanks. And next up is Michelle McGlone. Welcome, Michelle. And Michelle is going to present to us on an update on the Brookline Adult and Community Education, aka BASE, financial status. And I'm just going to point out, we're running a little bit behind schedule. We originally had 15 minutes for presentation and 15 minutes Q&A. So I'm not putting any pressure on you, Michelle, but if we can stick to our already extended timeline of 6:45, that would be amazing. But
I will
that's
do
on
my
us
best.
too. It's a team
Yeah,
effort. Okay.
It is. Well, I want to, thank you for having me do this update and also mention that Arthur Conquest is a panelist. Arthur is a town meeting member who's also serves on the BASE advisory board as our chair. So he's here to help me answer any questions that might come up for historical purposes before I started here. So as of today, our fund balance for BASE is about $275,000 and some change. Our revenue to date is $430,000, and our expenses right now have grown, unfortunately, and our expenses to date are about $531,000. So a couple of things happened. I'll call it like, the perfect storm. And I kind of have to rewind back to July. So in the middle of the summer, we had a couple of things happen. We had a staff member who was on administrative leave for about 4 months. And while paying the salary while on leave, we also had to have a temporary person come in and help us out. So we had some unexpected expenses in that regard. And then when that position opened up for that person who left the district, retired, we ended up getting a transfer from another department to fill that position, which I had tried to keep open for a little bit longer. And that was my plan, because I wasn't quite sure if it was a good thing for us to take it on at the time. But for many reasons, and something maybe later in an executive session, Mariah can share with you what I've shared with her the other day, about some of those circumstances. We had another staff member who had a wonderful opportunity to travel to Japan. So she resigned in the middle of our summer session. So we had a payout of vacation and sick time and things that we weren't anticipating there. And then I think the thing that really set us back is I ended up getting sick. I was out on medical leave. I was in and out of the hospital for 7 weeks. And I have had 3 surgeries. I have 1 more surgery to go. So I haven't been able to put in as much time and effort as I had in prior years, where I was going over and above what my role was, because we're so understaffed. So we sort of like had this perfect storm, on top of the fact that this is the first year that we did not produce a catalog that was mailed out to the public. So we did that last year. We saw a decent increase in our enrollment, but given the status of our budget and the way it is right now, we didn't feel like it would be prudent to expend the kind of money that we did. It costed almost $100,000 to do 4 catalogs to send it out to all members of the community. So instead, we opted to do a one-time green brochure that we can use at any point during the year and send it out. And we're hoping that at least we'll have something that's going to go in front of people. But I really think that, unfortunately, without that catalog, we've really aren't seeing the kind of enrollments that we had hoped, or that we did see last year as a result of sending it out. We also had some expenses on kiln repair in the pottery room that was unexpected, some electrical issues and things like that. The only other challenge that I can think of that I want to share is that some of the other community organizations that provide enrichment activities, say, for example, Brookline Recreation, we're competing for the same families for some of the activities that we're running. And they received a pretty decent chunk of change from the ARPA fund. And I think they were able to offer some really low or no cost programs, which drew some of our population away, because we're self-sustaining. We're doing the best we can with that. It was a challenge to be able to stay competitive with other adult and community education programs across the state, most of whom have a staff of about 11. Our staff right now is 1 adult program manager, 1 children's program manager, a daytime secretary, and evening secretary, because our classes run through the evening, and then myself. So we're kind of at a disadvantage with the districts that we compete with, which would be like Cambridge, Newton, Lexington, Concord, those communities. There are many other I call them mom and pop adult eds, where they're just running a couple of programs. They're not nearly, as large as we have been. So those were some of the challenges we face. What we're trying to do between now and the end of the year, we're going to work on a fundraiser. Sadly, one of our board members passed away, Chobi Hoy. So we're establishing a scholarship in Chobi's name, so that we can raise money to offset our expenses and giving financial aid to families who want to attend children's programming. So during the school vacations or summer vacation. So we're getting that off the ground. Potentially setting up an endowment. I need to talk a little bit more about that with our board. We received 2 grants. So we received a small ARPA grant, $55,000 ARPA grant, and then another $21,000 grant through the safety net and equity fund So we're partnering with Brookline Housing Authority and providing classes at the Housing Authority properties for adults and children with one grant, and the other grant we use to get 3 buses to transport low-income children from the Housing Authority to the summer programs, and you know, to be able to offer you know, some offset for some of our overhead. And we saw a really good increase in the number of children who participated you know, in our summer programs. It was up over 200 children from the prior year. So our growth in our enrollment has been sort of a roller coaster. Some terms we have better growth than other terms, but I go back to the fact that I really think it's a disservice to our program to not have the catalog. So what we're doing to try to mitigate that is we're approaching companies in Brookline to see if they want to take out an ad or even sponsor the catalog itself and say, you know, presented by whatever the company name might be. And it's inexpensive advertising for them, helps us cut our costs and get that catalog out. So that's kind of where we're at. I know, I'm sure you have a lot of questions. I'm trying to rush through everything, and I hope I've made sense with what I've been saying, but it's so good to see everybody and to be back, you know, in the saddle. And I'm very, very proud of my staff, given this perfect storm, you know, in particular, Jesse Donnelly and Trevette Campbell, who single-handedly carried on when the other program manager had to leave, and then myself out on medical leave, carried the bulk of the weight and you know, raised that $400,000 in revenue. So it's not a small task. And like I said, I am proud, but I am sad to report that, you know, I think I'm not quite sure what our end of the year is going to look like. We're still enrolling for spring. We're finishing up our winter term. You know, so best case scenario, you know, we end up with in the black, maybe $60,000 or so. Worst case, it could be up to 140,000 in the negative. So we're going to work as hard as we can between now and then to try to bring in as much revenue as we possibly can.
Thank you, Michelle. I just wanted to give Arthur a moment to say something too, but first I just want to say to you that how glad I am that you are on the mend, and wishing you the best in all of this. And thank you, as you said, to your team for holding things together through, as you mentioned, all these challenges. And I feel really grateful that we have you being so diligent and in spite of all of this. So thank you. I'm sure that others would express the same sentiment.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Arthur, we're at 6:38, but I just want to give you a minute if there's anything you want to add to what Michelle said. And then we want to definitely make sure we've got time for questions from the committee. Go ahead, Arthur.
I just, good evening, everyone. Arthur Conquest, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, I just want to piggyback on what Michelle said, and that, you know, the staff has really worked very hard to try to keep this thing going forward. They've all had, Michelle is only giving you the nice part, okay, or the upscale part of what has been going on for the last, I'm going to say, 8 months, with one staff leaving, but also the program having to keep her on salary, and some other things in terms of taking on a staff person from another department within the school department. It was just dumped on us. And so the staff and Michelle, taking into account also her medical leave, have really been bending over backwards and doing all that they can. It's not like people are sloughing, okay, or not taking, trying to keep the program going lightly. So with that, I don't want to keep anybody any longer. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Arthur. Any questions or comments? Oh, go ahead, Susan.
Yeah, I just, Michelle had mentioned that there is a you know, a serious possibility of the revenue not covering the expenses, but there is a fund balance in that revolving fund that would be able to absorb whatever that shortfall would be. So I just wanted to make mention of that so that folks weren't left hanging with that statement. A couple of years ago, the deputy superintendent had provided resources to lower the cost of base and took all the salaries in FY22 and charged it to the operating budget, which created this fund balance for base to help, you know, kind of fuel, hopefully, a recovery to that program. And so there is a fund balance coming forward of 350. So even if the deficit was 140, there would still be a couple of $100,000 in the revolving fund balance to help, you know, maybe launch or stabilize the program for the upcoming year.
Thank you for mentioning that, Susan. I should have mentioned that. I was flying through everything so quickly.
In prior years, hang on one second, David, I'll call on you next. In prior years, we voted, I think, to waive the base facility fees. And have we done that for FY24? And did we already vote that? Susan, this is probably a surprise to you.
I don't know, but
Yes.
I can say that I don't believe there's any expenses in the base budget to pay for that. Is there, Michelle? Not that I'm aware of. I don't see a line for it.
Right,
No.
did we already vote that, Michelle? for
It
this
was
year?
waived for this year, and then
Okay.
you had asked us to come up with a facilities fee starting this coming July.
That's right, that's
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, so that's something, but we're going to talk about, I think, facility fees next month. So it'll be another opportunity for us to wade into the fun world of facilities and user fees. I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to it. Okay, David, go ahead.
Hi, so Michelle, you mentioned during your presentation the challenges of not having a catalog. So first, I'm wondering, is the exclusion of a catalog a financial decision? And if so, do you feel that the savings in not having catalog has been made up for in the number of people who are enrolling in classes, or how does that balance look?
That's a great question. I really do believe that not having the catalog has hurt us. So in the savings that we made up, having lower enrollments, it negates the savings basically. And I think that's what you're asking me, right? Am I?
It is, yes.
Yeah. So, you know, but I just didn't, I wanted to do the prudent thing. And, you know, looking at the year, I was like, oh my God, you know, can we have $100,000 expense? I don't think so. You know, so I wanted to do the responsible thing. But as a result, this test, you know, has shown us that we're losing enrollment. So even doing the brochure, it has helped us, but it's not enough. So I really, really want to get back to having the catalog go out. It's a lot of paper. It's a lot of work on the staff. It's a huge production, but I really do believe it's worth the return on the investment. It's just, you know, with the bottom line looking like it was, I just didn't want to be irresponsible.
Arthur, go ahead.
It's very difficult to try and produce a catalog from a hospital bed at Brigham and Women's.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean,
That too.
that's the biggest thing. Okay. And, you know, I don't think that members of the staff have the skills to be able to do that. So I can attest to the fact that Michelle was laid up at Brigham and Women's. Only went to visit her. Okay,
He
so
came in and told everybody he was my doctor. He burst into the room and said, "I'm her doctor." I said, "Hello, Arthur."
Well, unless we have any other comments, I just want to say thank you to you, Michelle, for all the hard work of you and your team again, and thank you for the update. And it'll be great to possibly get a written update, or in the final report of the year, we'll certainly get the updated fund balance.
Yes.
And I guess that's probably the conclusion of the base section of things. Thank you so much, Michelle. You brought us home 6:45.
All right.
Amazing stuff. Okay, so our record remains intact for meetings ending on time, which is, I think we're like 101 versus 1 loss. So that's good.
Have a
For
good
anyone
night.
keeping score at home. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you,
Yeah.
everybody. I don't
Thank
think we have
you.
any other new business, so we'll end on time. Have a great night.
Thank
See you
you.
tomorrow. Bye.